everybody, and welcome back. I am the Pompkin King, and in today's episode we're going to be continuing our build of pure imagination, pure horror. In the last episode, we built ourselves our first dark ride. We also established a new food and beverage service stand in the form of the Haunted Mansion from Disneyland. And today I'm diving right in, and I want to build a building that isn't actually going to serve any purpose in game, but that will use our imaginations to add another attraction to the park. So what I'm doing here is I'm actually building Miskatonic University from the Lovecraft books. Miskatonic, for those who don't know, is the same university where the Necronomicon was stored, the book that summons Cthulhu and drives people out of their minds. It was also mentioned in passing in the Dunwich Horror and a couple other of Lovecraft's stories. And the real Miskatonic University doesn't exist, it's a fictional place, but it was based off of the Mount Holyoke College, as well as the St. Alban in Canada, and Brown University in Providence. And for the building, I've just kind of gone through and made kind of an amalgamation of those three. I'm doing this in the Romanesque Revival style, which is, again, a very popular style of architecture for the mid-1800s, mid to late 1800s. It's all this brick construction. Right here, I'm trying to figure out the roofs, and once again, the roof system is by far my least favorite part of playing Planet Coaster. It's sped up about 40 times for this video, but I had a lot of trouble with the roofs for this build, and as you'll see, I eventually have to cheat to kind of get them there. Right here, I just could not fill this one little gap that was left, so I had to go in with independent shapes, match the colors, and then move them into position and copy them all the way down, which is a bummer. It hurts my OCD to have to do that, but on the other hand, no one will notice from a distance, so it is what it is. With this build, I'm also trying out something new. First of all, you may notice that the footage isn't as jumpy as it was in the previous episode. I found that while I was editing that, I actually was giving myself motion sickness, which that's not good. So what I'm doing here is I've slowed it down. This is only 2400% speed rather than 4,000%. It's much more manageable at this speed. I'm also trying to make a conscious effort to not move the camera as much because it did cause some problems for me last time. Here I'm just building the bell tower. This is actually based on the bell tower at St. Albans, and it has to kind of be its own separate thing for this game because I can't recreate the one at St. Albans using the pieces from Planet Coaster. But what I end up with actually has more character, I think, so I'm okay with it. Here I'm just going around and applying the trim to the outside, which again is cartoonishly large. I really don't know what Frontier was thinking making some of these building pieces as big as they are, but there's no real reason for it. And then I just added some of the Moorish blocks for decorations. On the actual clock tower, they have a lot of intricate brickwork, which I can't replicate here. And then I'm just putting on these little castle turrets on the outside, which I think gives it a cool kind of gothic look. I'm actually quite proud of the bell tower itself. Using the angled roofs and the cone roof that they have, I was able to make it look as though there were interior parts to the bell tower. And here, I'm just showing a time lapse of the building and construction. I thought that might be an option going forward for building in the game so that I don't have to have as much of time lapse footage. So leave a comment and tell me if you would prefer to see the stage-by-stage time lapses where I show you the building as it's being constructed, or the sped-up time lapse where you get to see the entire build process. So I've just gone ahead and placed the Miskatonic University in our horror node. Now, what I want to use this building for. We have to use our imagination a little bit, because what I want inside here is I want there to be a replica of the Army Medical Museum, or the Armed Forces Medical Museum, beg pardon, which showcases all kinds of like military freaks and mutants and like all kinds of stuff. If you've ever seen it, it is horrific. There's, you know, cows that were born after nuclear explosions without jaws, and fetuses in jars, and like the skeletons of mutants and all kinds of other things. And it is like, it's pretty bad to visit, but it is quite an attraction, and I do think that it would fit in really well with the horror node of Pure Imagination. Of course, I can't build any of that in game, so we just have to use our imagination and say that's what it is. Here, I'm going ahead and putting in a little cemetery. I was struck with the idea that people have to go all the way around to the end of the node in order to be able to come around to the other side. So I figured I'd make a shortcut, and I just built this little pathway through a cemetery here. I'm just going around putting in walls now. This cemetery is heavily inspired by the antebellum cemeteries in Savannah, Georgia, where I went to college. And there are two major cemeteries in Savannah that really capture the 1870s through 1890s feel of the Victorian cemetery, which, let me just say, the Victorians, they knew how to do their cemeteries. They believed heavily in the Bella Mortium, or the beautiful death, and they wanted their cemeteries to be like parks, where you would actually spend days in the cemetery, like picnicking and reading and having fun, playing among the tombstones and whatever. So there's lots of statuaries, there's lots of mausoleums, and it's really a beautiful cemetery. The two that I'm directly referencing are the Bonaventure Cemetery and the Laurel Grove Cemetery in Savannah. I also did grab a few reference images from cemeteries that are similar in Louisiana, like in New Orleans, and one from Mobile, which is in Alabama. But the trick to these kinds of cemeteries is you have to think of them as like a city. As a matter of fact, the cemeteries in that time were set up as necropoli. They have actual streets, they have street names. Families would buy whole plots of land and be buried there for generations. So I went through and I went in, put in a bunch of those little individual plots all around. The other thing that you'll find a lot in antebellum cemeteries are statues. They loved their statues. And there's some really excellent work that are done in some of those. For example, at the Laurel Grove Cemetery, if you ever get a chance to visit Savannah, check out Laurel Grove Cemetery and go and visit Silence, which is a statue that is guarding over the Civil War burial ground. And it's a really beautiful piece of statuary. Like, the whole cemetery is just gorgeous, really. And they're well worth the cost of admission, which is nothing. Here I'm putting in just a couple of pillar monuments. You see these a lot in the antebellum cemeteries, these really tall obelisk pillars. And now I'm just going ahead and putting in another mausoleum. I've tried to vary up the style every time so that it's not always the same. And this is something that you find in antebellum cemeteries regularly. And here you can see I'm kind of sinking some of the crypts, and this is actually something that you see in older cemeteries in Savannah, like Colonial Park. The reason that they have a sunk entrance is because they would knock out the bricks and dig down every time in order to be able to get into the actual crypt. So flying up over the top of the Miskatonic University, we get a real good look at the cemetery here. I did populate it quite liberally with the zombie animatronics because I figured, you know, why not? We have zombies, we might as well put them in. And now I'm just adding in a little bit of foliage to try and make it a little bit more realistic. Now, one thing that I have discovered that I really like in this game is I love playing around with the different textures for the grass. And actually, it's really easy to make a build seem much more in-depth and much more alive, so to speak, which is ironic, I know, considering I'm talking about a graveyard full of zombies. But you can make it seem much more in the world by adding different textures to the ground, in particular in places where there would be heavy foot traffic, or underneath trees where there would be leaves and that sort of thing, where the shade builds up. And it just really gives it that bonus little extra touch to make it more believable, I think. So the cemetery is primarily just a way to transport from one side of the node to the other. But I just really like the idea of having this be a little decorative area where people can walk through and be able to sit on some of the benches if they want to. Which I'm actually going to put in a couple of benches along the walkway, and we will do that next time. Moving on over to the other side of Main Street, we now have entered into Planet Zoo. This is my first time building in Planet Zoo, but I'm trying to replicate the train tracks that we had from the horror node so that I can include our first animal attraction, which is going to be a wolf habitat. I wanted to have the wolves have a habitat in the horror node so that their howling would actually be heard throughout the horror node and would give it nice ambience. So here I'm just replicating the tracks. I went through and took several screen captures of the horror node entrance to the wolf's pen, and then I matched it as best as possible in Planet Zoo. I couldn't match it 100% because, for whatever reason, in Planet Coaster you can plant down trees that have autumn leaves on them, but in Planet Zoo you can't. But you can plant down an autumn sugar maple, but none of the others, and I don't understand why that should be. Maybe it's because Planet Zoo has actual seasons. I am building in the temperate biome, but honestly, I have no idea if it's going to do fall leaves for it or not. But what I wanted to accomplish with this wolf sanctuary is I wanted to build like an experience encounter. And I was thinking about all of the different movies and stories where people are attacked by wolves and really make it very dramatic, lots of underlighting and a whole bunch of other stuff. So I was playing around with the idea of making the wolf's habitat like this buried mine shaft. And I thought that was a cool idea. And then I had, like set ideas for scenes from movies where wolves attack and they are going after the main protagonists or whatever, and you see them from dramatic angles and they're jumping. This, of course, is complete and utter fantasy, since wolves do not actually behave that way in real life. And in fact, wolves are very docile around humans. They are not likely to attack you unless they are starving or unless you're wounded or sick. But even so, people have this cultural fear of wolves, so I wanted to make sure that I put them into the enclosure. And here is where we bring it all together. So I'm coming down the main walkway. We're in Planet Zoo now. This is the walkway that leads to the mountain node, which would be right on the other side of the train tracks directly ahead. And as we come around the corner, we're going into the wolf pen, and here it is. This is the final result. Now, in this wolf pen, I've put a little house. This serves not only as a shelter for the wolves, but it also is a shot-for-shot remake of the house from the movie Dog Soldiers. If you haven't seen Dog Soldiers, it's a fairly bad werewolf movie from Britain. But they end up fighting off a pack of werewolves in a house that looks exactly like this one. And I thought that it would be thematic to have the wolves going in and out of the house. So that will wrap it up for today's episode. If you enjoyed, go ahead and hit that like button. And for more of the Pure Imagination content, subscribe for more. But until next time, I am the Pompkin King, and I'll see you later.